Okay, so today we are going to work on the skin. So we're going to work primarily on the face, and here we don't really have any other areas that she's got her skin showing. So I am going to use, since she's Native American, she is going to have kind of light olivey colored skin, not necessarily real dark. Since this is a commission, I want to kind of match it to the skin of the woman who ordered it. So I am going to use a layering effect. We're going to start with light flesh. And then we will also be using this cinnamon color. These are all Faber Castell watercolor pencils. And yellow ochre. And then also for her cheeks, we'll be using this deep scarlet red. So to get started, I am going to actually color on the skin with this pencil. And so it's going to go directly onto the skin, and then I will massage it in with water and the paintbrush in just a moment. So let me color this up. Okay, so now that I have the pencil, which is the pigment, on the illustration board is what I'm working on, I am going to grab my pencil, my paintbrush here. And this is a Loew-Cornell angular brush. It's been used pretty well, but that's because I use it in a circular motion. So what I'm going to do is I have a tissue here, and I have a small glass of water like this. And I'm just going to go ahead and saturate it in the water, and then I'm going to dip my paintbrush just on the edge of this paper towel so it picks up some of the moisture there. And then I am going to start making this wet and turning it into paint. And just go ahead and start adding. Once I've started the flesh, I can't really stop. So you just kind of start to massage it around. And usually what I do is I work from the center towards the outside. So towards the edges of the hair, towards the chin. That way I get a nice even skin tone with no blotches. So I'm adding water, and I'm also, you can see there's a little bit of pigment here. So I'm adding water, and I'm also dipping my brush onto the paper towel to pull off some of the pigment, because this pigment is not going to be as strong once it's actually turned into paint. So it's going to be much lighter. Okay, so this is pretty well massaged up here. I don't see any blotches. Skin tone looks really good, so I'm going to move down towards this section here. And I'm going to avoid the areas that have the ink, simply because I don't want to wet them and reactivate. They are supposed to be waterproof, but I have to be really, really careful around the edges where you're using a really light color like a flesh tone or a yellow or an off-white, because sometimes it can bleed back in. So you just want to be careful around there. So I'm just going to keep massaging. If I stopped right here, I would probably get a line here that I wouldn't be able to remove. And so that's why I have to kind of keep going in a continuous fashion, because with watercolor pencil, or watercolor in general, what you're doing is mostly staining the paper, as opposed to an acrylic where you're laying an opaque paint over a solid surface that's not usually very porous. The paper is soaking up the color, and you're only going to be able to pull out so much of this color once it's set in. So we want to make sure that we don't get any blotchies in here. And some of them we can correct afterwards. And once I get all of this done, we are actually going to layer a lot of other colors in here on the cheeks and around the sides. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up. The massaging of the light flesh. I'll speed it up for you, and then we can come back and talk about the layering of the colors and how we do that. Okay, so now that I've finished the first stage, which is just to lay down the light color flesh, we are going to layer different colors over it. And it might look a little bit blotchy right now, but that's okay, because this is still a little bit wet up here and it will dry. There is also these other colors that we're going to add in. And I have kind of this cinnamon color. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change brushes here to this 000 Cotman, and sorry, it's not in very good shape. I need to replace it. But I am actually going to now color off of the paper over here onto the side. And so what I'm doing is I'm creating kind of a mini palette. So if you're familiar with watercolors, sometimes they have these little hard palettes that don't have any water in it. You can make them into paint by adding water. So I'm just going to add water to my brush here, and this is now kind of a palette. So I'm going to turn this into paint. So I'm going to lift some of this color off here, and now I actually have paint on my brush that I can use. So I am basically going to shade and start to make this a little bit darker. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the color to where I want it to be, and then I'm going to blend out like this. And I'm doing a very light motion, and as I blend out, the paint is getting less and less, and it's also drying. So I'm going to massage it as it dries and keep it nice and even. I'm going to pull up a little bit more paint and add it to this side. And as you can see, there's not a lot of pigment there, so I'm going to have to color and add another palette here. And pull that up. And if I feel like I have a little bit too much pigment, I will wipe it off the paper towel there, or on the paper towel. And my light source is generally from the front. So what I do is I shade kind of around the eyes and the outsides of the face. And what happens is I end up with a very colorful display of palette colors on my background paper. I actually have a stack of papers behind this. So that it doesn't get too thin and offers a little bit of absorption behind. And then also when it just gets to be too much, I will change the paper out. Okay, I need a little bit more pigment here. Now the reason I'm not coloring directly onto the skin is because I don't want to, if the paper's kind of wet, I don't want it to cause issues with showing up too much or too little. Depending on how wet or how dry the paper is, it will receive it in different ways. This is a great way to layer. And I'm going to fill in a lot of this flesh down here underneath on the chin, because the chin is usually almost always shaded underneath. Maybe a little bit more here. And usually I will add the pigment and push towards this direction. And if I feel like, let's say that looks too blotchy, which it does, I'm going to get some clear water. I'm going to make sure it's good, and then I'm just going to massage it and push it. And the thing with watercolor is that you can lift color very easily, so you have to be really careful. And sometimes you got to add a little bit more pigment back in to make it even, and then it will dry. And sometimes you have to wait until it's completely dry before you go back in. But you wouldn't want to wait until it was dry if you're trying to lift color, because it can be very difficult to lift once it's been added. And I will work on this a little bit more as we go. So, okay, I would like to, at this point, I am going to work on her cheeks. And this is something that's very difficult to do and that a lot of people are going to be excited to learn. So we are going to, I'm going to mix a little bit of our color palette here. So I was just using that cinnamon color, and I'm going to add a little bit more cinnamon color here over to my palette. And then I'm also now going to add some of this deep scarlet red. So I'm just going to kind of put them next to each other, but not right on top of each other. Okay, so my brush is wet. I'm going to go ahead and take just a little bit off of there. I'm going to add both of these colors at the same time. Add a little bit more water, go onto my paper towel, and now I'm ready to kind of start. And I'm going to start at the heaviest edge of the ink here, and I'm going to start filtering out. Now red is a very dangerous color because it's going to stain pretty quickly, so you have to work very quickly. Notice I have a very light amount of pigment on my brush, and that is because I can always add just a little bit more. Okay, so I have my first layer of cheek down there, and I am going to pick up a little bit more of the cinnamon, a little bit more of the scarlet, a little bit more water, cinnamon, scarlet, and then I'm going to add in here again and massage out. Okay, this is a very delicate process here where it's going to take a few layers. I'm just going to keep filtering out until I get out to where I feel I want to be. That looks pretty good for that side. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, a little bit more water, a little bit more cinnamon and scarlet. Okay, until it matches the other side. Looks like we need to do at least another layer. One more layer here. And my brush is relatively dry. It's actually very dry at this point. Okay, I don't really like this transition here, so I just wet my brush and made it clear, and I'm just going to kind of wash this area, almost like I'm cleaning it, to make sure it blends very nicely. Okay, so I know it might look a little strange now, but once we add in the lip color, it'll look really pretty. And I actually like to add a little bit of red in some of the other areas as well. So I'm going to layer just a little bit of that scarlet over here. And I am also going to layer some of it up here. And yes, I'm going right over the top. And I just cleared my brush with some clear water so we can blend it in. It just gives it just a little bit of flush red here. Okay. All right. And what I'm going to do also to add a little bit of interest to make this an olive color skin is I'm going to add this a little bit of yellow ochre. You got to be careful with yellow because it can be really strong. I'm going to go ahead and create a yellow palette over here. I'm going to pick some up, but I want this to be really watery and very, very light because I can always add more, but it's difficult to take away. So I'm going to start up here in this corner, and I'm going to start adding a little bit of yellow, and I'm going to pull out into the skin. I'm going to pull from this lighter palette here because I want it to be very watery. A little bit more color. I'm going to add a little bit over here, just very, very lightly across the skin. It shouldn't be extremely obvious, and it won't be once the other colors are added, once her hair is done, and those types of things. I'm going to go ahead and add just a little bit off of the cheeks here, but not too much. This gives her a nice, really, really pretty glow to her face here. I'm going to add quite a bit of water there to massage this out. And I'm moving into the area that we have already determined for blush. I'm going to do a little bit here on the chin. Really water that down and massage it in. Okay, and then I'm going to move up here. I kind of stopped there at the eyebrows, so now I'm going to add a little bit in here and continue down just a little bit. There's not very much pigment on my brush. I'm going to add into the eyebrows, above the eye. Notice this is getting pretty wet and watered down over here. I'm almost done. Got a little bit too much yellow there. You can see it sticking out, so I'm going to clean it off here with some extra water and then massage and push around until it matches. Add a little bit of the yellow here in the center. It's very, very watery at this point and it's still pretty wet. I'm going to add quite a bit of water and make sure I massage around and don't get any strange blotches. Okay. So we have a really nice glow. Go ahead and add a little bit of yellow down here. Until I feel like it's nice and even. And once it dries, anything that you kind of see that sticks out really won't be an issue. And then of course I will add eyeshadow here and, you know, start working on the eyes and the lips, and this will all look really, really beautiful once all of the supporting elements are added. So that is it for my flesh tone tutorial. Thank you so much for watching.